broadcasting from a resistance camp on Dorvan 5. This is PoliTreks.
The Prime Directive, the Declaration of Human Rights, the United Federation of Planners, the United Nations, World War II, the Dominion Federation War, the Art of War, the Teachings of Sirach, Jesus Christ, Kalis the Unforgettable.
Welcome everyone to PoliTreks. My name is Barry DeFord, and with me on the interview today is the often imitated, never replicated Mr. Shashanks, and our very special guest, Bryson. We are going to be talking today about something that I think is extremely important as we start looking at how race and racism are very much factored into the very fabric of our society in a lot of ways, and how we are now standing up against that in a very real and material way that I'm extremely happy to see. I guess, I'm happy that it's happened. I wish it would have happened a long time earlier, but I am glad to see this groundswell of support that Black Lives Matter is getting. With regard to that, though, we also want to make sure that we understand that Indigenous lives matter as well. I think it's important that we continue this conversation into realms that science fiction has tackled to some degree, and maybe in some cases hasn't. So this is a very constructive conversation about Star Trek's approach to Indigenous people and Indigenous culture. Of course, we love Star Trek, but at the same time, it is the product of its times. And I think Bryson and Shashank and myself have a really good conversation about that. I think this is going to probably be a part 2 coming eventually as well. And we're really excited to have Bryson back on, as much as it was an honor to have him on the show to begin with. So we hope you enjoy the episode, and feel free to follow us on Twitter at PoliTreks. You can also support the Trek Geeks Network on Patreon as well. Gets you some pretty nifty perks here and there. Trek Geeks Network also stands with Black Lives Matter. You can check out links for support as well, and check out the link below that Bryson brings up about his cousin and singing Blackbird as well. I'm really excited to bring this up as well. The Trek Geeks Network is going to be hosting a charity live stream to benefit Feeding America, and that live stream is going to be taking place this Thursday, June 11th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's in the year 2020. Really highly recommend you checking it out. The wonderful Mr. Jonathan Frakes has agreed to join us for that live stream, and I just very excited to be part of a network that is taking so very seriously the economic hardships and precarity people are experiencing around the world, but helping people in their own areas specifically. It's something that we at PoliTreks very much want to make sure that we show all of our support for, and hope you can too. So if you can join Dan, Bill, and the Trek Geeks Network this Thursday, June 11th at 8:30 Eastern, check out the Feeding America charity live stream with wonderful Mr. Jonathan Frakes. And now on to our discussion with Bryson. Here we have today on our main topic, we're going to be talking about Indigenous representation in Star Trek, and then possibly sort of in sci-fi in general. So, Shashank, as a Indian, what sort of things did you encounter, or did you have much of an understanding of Indigenous culture through Star Trek when you were watching it when you were a younger person?
First off, I appreciate the question. It is a loaded question, and I will preface that by saying that I'm sure even as a Western viewer, there are things as a Native American culture enthusiast or somebody who's in the know picks up things differently than I do. In our textbooks, like growing up, in our history textbook, we were basically there's maybe half a page that told us there were once these people called the Native Americans, and then there was a genocide, and then their land was taken away, and then it became America. Like that's about as far as we get to in our textbooks back home in India. So really the big representation that I found in Star Trek is the Journey's End episode. You remember that one?
Yes.
From TNG. And that is that was the one that I found, apart from, we've talked to our guest earlier about this, and apart from little things like the names of places or certain ships that were named, that, they're supposed to be, the intention is to honor the Native American people. And those are about what I picked up. What about you? What did you pick up?
I have to say that it sort of was kind of like monocultural. And it was only later on in my life that I ended up getting a much better understanding of how Indigenous society and culture is, kind of path to hell paved with good intentions, sort of misrepresented in so many different ways. And it came from a number of experiences, but one of those experiences was encountering friends who I had made and who I had met on Twitter. And one of them is a very, very entertaining and fun person. Bryson is a fellow Trek fan, and this is an important day because I get to listen to both of you talk about this, and I get to ask a ton of questions. So without further ado, Bryson, welcome to PoliTreks. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Kwe, which means hello in Migma. I'm Bryson. I live in Nova Scotia, which is the settler term for Mi'kmaq, which is basically Nova Scotia, PEI, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Maine, and part of Gaspé, Quebec. Yeah, so I grew up here. I've lived here most of my life. And yeah, I don't know what else to really say.
Where did your interaction with Star Trek start? Do you remember the first time you saw Star Trek anything? Or how did that connection happen?
It was when I was young. I would watch. I grew up with The Next Generation, so that's where I first started watching Star Trek. And then ever since then, I watched pretty much every episode, every series, every movie.
So, do you have a favorite character or characters? Because naming one that's not fair.
I know. Yeah. It really depends on the day, really. But you can really relate to like Chakotay or Cisco, especially for being BIPOC, having Indigenous or Black representation on screen is, it relates more. You relate more to them, I think.
No, absolutely. And it's something that I think a fellow like myself doesn't notice, the idea of representation being something important. We just our last episode, we had Amrit Kaur, who was on Ask Not, one of the short treks, and we were talking about Indian Canadian representation. And this is kind of an interesting way that we can segue into other perspectives. So growing up, watching these shows, I think you and I are around kind of the same sort of age range, teenagers in the late 90s kind of thing. We're getting older every year, man. I can't.
I know.
But, looking at those characters who you say that you relate to, in what ways would you say that relation came as, a stroke of luck? I think both Robert Beltran and Avery Brooks are good at their craft and are good actors. And do you feel that it was almost like you were going to root for them no matter what? Or was there other ways that they allowed you to relate to themselves? So say if we used Chakotay or Cisco, was it that you're going to root for them anyway? Or are there different avenues that you found yourself relating to these characters?
It was great to see an Indigenous person in a command situation, to see somebody that is like you on screen, so that's what drew me first, I guess. And it's just it's to see them as, not just a background character, they were in such great positions in their show,
Yeah. I wonder if though, when we look at different pieces of these characters and stuff like that, I feel like the actors themselves seem to sort of want to make sure that they are bringing up those sorts of things. Like I think of Avery Brooks when he was talking about going onto the holodeck and having to help Vic out and stuff. But he was going to Las Vegas when most African American people would be working in the back kitchen if they were lucky and whatnot. And, watching Chakotay sort of evolve as a character, and then also watching Robert Beltran's relationship to the show evolve as well. I think there's a lot more to sort of sit down and unpack. And I don't know if we're going to have time in the hour that we have to do it, but I'm just wondering, just sort of on an open sort of sense, if you were to find yourself, and usually we'd ask this at the end, but I might want to ask that at the beginning, just for conversation's sake, where would you want to be on which ship, and where, like, what would you want to do on that ship? You know, if you could be any Federation officer, person, or anything, what era, what ship, and what rank?
Definitely, I would be a helmsman, flying a ship, like that's awesome. Like in my real life, I work on ships, and, I am a good helmsman. I like doing stuff like that. So I think that would be a position I would enjoy. Eventually, who wouldn't want to be a captain, right?
I would say so.
Yeah. Era, probably like Voyager or DS9 era. Definitely.
That's great.
How about you guys?
I think I would probably want to be telemetry on the, probably the Enterprise D. So I could high five you.
In the past, I've given my answer to this question, and I'm sticking to it. It has not changed. I want to be the traveler.
Oh, you literally want to be the traveler.
Yeah, and I want to mind face through different dimensions. And like in the episode, he says one of my favorite lines of Trek, where he says, the idea that thought and time start at the same place. Like mankind is not ready for something like that. And like I want to be at a place where that is what people are thinking. Hey, but I know we talked a little bit about Indigenous representation in Trek earlier. Now, there are two kinds of people, right? There are the people who, before giving a shot, they'll say, hey, I'm about to give you a shot. I'm going to count to 3. I'm going to put that syringe in your arm, and then it is going to go in. I'm the kind of person who's like, hey, I'm about to give you a shot, and I just give it. And then I understand that it's painful for some people to deal with, but I would rather just rip the Band-Aid out. So let me talk to you about this. This is something that I've always wondered about. And maybe I am looking into it too much, or maybe I'm looking to be offended. But do you remember the episode, The Paradise Syndrome of the original series?
Oh, yeah. I actually just watched it again last night.
That is a painful episode for me to watch. I cannot watch that. And like, that's not wrong, right? Like when I look at something like that, I feel like I get mad when white people Bollywood dance,
Yeah.
I can only imagine what somebody from that culture is watching that episode. Like that's a really problematic episode. Yeah.
Oh, very problematic. Like it's quintessential Hollywood native. You know what I mean? Like it's just over sensationalized, I guess, and like just out there, like with wrong, like monoculture, like traditions going on, and like I guess I don't know. It's hard to explain in one sentence. Like it's very problematic.
Can I ask you another question about that episode? I'm sorry, Barry. I know you're trying to keep it positive. Here's a question I have about that episode, and then we can move on to other things, simply because when it's an episode I cannot watch, and I'm not even from that culture. And it's just a difficult, problematic episode for me. But a specific aspect about that episode that has bugged me more than a lot of the things about it is the makeup that all the clearly Caucasian people put on, and the attire they wear, and they're clearly trying to pass off as a quasi-Native American culture.
Oh yeah, like they're doing red face.
And so yes, that is the equivalent of somebody doing blackface, right?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah, and it's just a difficult episode to watch, and the things that are happening on the ship are completely fine. They're just trying to fight with the Rock, if I remember correctly, which is, that's just another classic POS episode. But what happened on that planet was really problematic for me. I'm sorry, Barry. I didn't mean to detract from what we were trying to talk about, but that was one episode that I did not mention at the beginning because I realized I blocked it out of my mind. I don't even want to think about it.
That's being code of honor.
Well, and like you look at that episode compared to Journey's End, like they're both pretty like Hollywood native, but like they're on a whole different plane with each other. You know what I mean? Like it's from one extreme to the other.
Yeah, it's like McClintock native representation, like, John Wayne sort of stuff, Roy Rogers and Trigger, and then it's the Dances with Wolves sort of trope. And in both cases, the only thing that can save the day is the arrival of the white man, who naturally takes a leadership role immediately. And,
exactly.
and is sort of looked at in this sort of odd kind of way. And I mean, if we just take specifically Migma Society and the way the Migma people were capable of keeping the first explorers, the colonial explorers, alive for decades, and teaching them techniques and how to live off of the land, I mean, that entire story gets completely just
whitewashed.
Whitewashed, completely destroyed. And so I wonder, maybe we can kind of look at this in the sense of Paradise Syndrome is nothing that Star Trek will ever fully be able to shake off of its, shake out of its DNA, right? It's something that as Star Trek fans, everyone has to look at it and go, yep, that's a thing. But I guess what I want to sort of look at more so is not this monocultural sense. I want to learn a little bit about Migma Society, if we'd be able to just kind of take a little off-ramp there and talk a little bit about elements of Migma culture that you think, Bryson, would be important for people who are from other countries or settlers themselves living on, in some cases, Migma land. What are some things about Migma society or culture would you want to share, just kind of generally?
Well, like with Migma culture, we've been here probably about over 10,000 years, right? Mm-hmm. In Mi'kma'ki, and we're some of the oldest tribes to have European contact. Like, Europeans have been here since the early 1600s, so we're kind of, I guess we're survivors, we've gone through the ringer and have still maintained most of our culture. A lot of it is gone, unfortunately, due to residential schools and colonialism. But we do have a strong culture still, and there's a lot of resurgence in our language and in cultural practices. So, I guess it would be that we're survivors.
That's a great point. It brings me actually to I took a group of students to a powwow on Cree territory.
Okay.
And we were at a Woodland Cree powwow in the province of Alberta, and I was watching what's called the chicken dance, and so it's a prairie chicken.
Oh yes.
And it's captivating. You're watching this dancer, and he's dancing to the rhythmic beat of the single drum, and there's between 5 and 10 voices all around the drum, and the look in his eye and the way he's moving, you can't look away. It's very captivating. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I was speaking with an elder. What kind of, how old is this dance? This is amazing. And she's like, oh, we made it up recently, or this version of it recently. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, honey, it was all destroyed. We're rebuilding as we go, and we're relearning our culture and our society. And so sometimes when I see Indigenous culture represented on Star Trek in such a way, I'm almost worried that kind of further pulls the story away from it. And so some things about Migma society that I'm trying to learn a little bit through your Migma word of the day actually is the power structures are completely different. And I wonder if a Migma person meeting a Starfleet captain, what do you think the impression would be if they were to look at a Starfleet captain and how he or she is running things? As you understand it, would you say, if I could ask that question, I'm not sure.
I would say, looking from a modern lens to a past lens, I would say it would be, seeing the dictatorship of it. I don't know how to describe that. There's no
consensus.
Yeah, especially in Mi'kmaq culture, it's a lot of democratic, consensus, and especially we're very matriarchal, and I guess it would just be a different structure. I don't know how to describe it.
If you can help me answer a question that might be in the same realm. Now, we've talked about the Paradise Syndrome, we've talked about Journey's End, and things have gotten better, right? Like as Star Trek went on, they're not even close to perfect, but they've gotten better. What do you think is a good Star Trek story that we can tell that is not the white man liberator narrative, but something that complements Star Trek as it stands and also respects and showcases the Native American culture? There have to be stories that we could tell in that regard, right?
Oh yeah. Like I think what basically like is the irk about Indigenous people in sci-fi is that it is monoculture. It's monolithic. In North America, there's over 500 distinct tribes. You look at those few episodes throughout the whole franchise that are Indigenous based.
Yeah.
And you look at them and they're pretty like one layered. But you look at the fictional cultures that they have, there's so many layers to them, especially with like Spock. He is a fake person, a fake culture, like, and they have everything right down to the T, like, of their culture, of their language, of everything. And then they put out this person and they can't even distinguish which tribe he's in.
Well, that might be the strange new worlds that Star Trek has to pull itself out of, right?
Yeah.
The idea that it can create something like the Klingon Empire and their entire culture and a language with verbs and phonetics and everything like that, and yet they can't distinguish exactly who Chakotay would belong to. Tribe, right? They sort of hint at Mayan, I think, from time to time, but at other times he comes off kind of more Apache, Arapaho, even Choctaw to some degree, and then they flip it back around, and so he sort of travels.
He's fluid tribe, I guess.
Tribe fluid, and I guess sometimes the little voice in the back of my head says, "Well, something's better than nothing, isn't it?" What would you say to that?
I say that all the time too. Like, something is better than nothing, like, and you look at that as in LGBTQ, like, representation as well. Something's better than nothing. Back in the 90s, we got Dax kissing another lady and everybody's all up in arms. Now everybody's all up in arms with Stamets. Yeah. So like, I guess something is better than nothing, but at the same time, it's like, why do we have to compromise with that? Why can't it be more?
Sometimes,
and correct.
Yeah, sometimes I worry that it's sort of the filter of whatever lawyer or person who's sort of making sure that different boxes get ticked off, and they don't rile people up too much. And sometimes I wonder, like, would the Paradise Syndrome look different if the story that was actually intended to be told got told by the people who wanted to tell it before it kind of moved through those sort of corporate filters? And I mean, wondering about that is one thing, when sometimes you kind of have to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I often wonder. So I guess, we've talked a bit about the idea of monoculture and the idea that someone who would really truly represent an Indigenous character would be able to identify where exactly they came from or what group that they became from. Now, looking at how we portray, even in Canadian history, Indigenous people as a monoculture, we talk about this term decolonize, take away the colonial sense. Long story short, do you still think that Star Trek is in and of itself a colonial representation of humanity?
Short answer, yes. You just look at like how they represent the expansion of humanity, like they're always going to one place and colonizing more and colonizing that. And basically like, like you just look at Journey's End where they're still trying to get away from colonization. They were driven off their home world to find a better place. And then they end up in Cardassian territory, where it's another dictatorship, really.
Where everyone's planting flags.
Yeah, and they just want to survive. They just want to live off the land.
I often sort of think to myself about what Indigenous values in space travel would look like. And the big question that came to me was, is exploration and colonization, must they go hand in hand? So can you be an explorer and not a colonizer?
Well, sure you can. There are recordings all over time when people from different cultures would go, and all we have are these journals of them experiencing that culture. And then either they decided to stay as guests and assimilate to the already existing culture, or they left going back to their homeland, right? So, yeah, of course you can be an explorer and not a colonizer. And to answer the question you had asked earlier, Barry, Star Trek is a great franchise. It is still very forward thinking and better than a lot of the television that is out there today. And its intentions are honorable, but it cannot help itself but be a colonial narrative show, because at the core of it, it is a show about a government that is saying that we have all these rules and regulations. So when we go to a place, of course, we would know better than the heathens that are there. Like, that's where the show started. And then I think as time went on, especially with Deep Space Nine, when the narrative shifts away from Starfleet and it shifts into this Bajoran culture, which to me has a lot of shades of the Indian culture, not the Native American, the South Asian Indian culture. I mean, they pray to their gods, they have idols, they all put on face makeup, they have gratitude festivals when they burst fireworks. So I think the show itself has gotten to a place where it is becoming more and more about not being that colonial narrative show. Like, even if you look at the latest season of Star Trek Picard, somebody, I think it was the Left Page pod, where they were mentioning about how, it can't help itself but be a show about a white man, like, going to a place and saying, I know better than everybody, please let me help you. I mean, whether you agree with that or not, and I don't think it's necessarily that blanket black or white, but I think the show itself has to find a place to not keep going there. And that's why I really respect season 1 and 2 of Discovery and the 3 J.J. Abrams movies that came out, because they're just about, we're going to shoot things in space. Like, that's what we're doing. And then, we also have these inward freedoms where, there are men who are couples, and then there are gender fluid people. So I think that is more of the direction that if Star Trek wants to keep surviving and not be in a place where we have to do episodes like this, it has to just keep going into places where we're going to wear costumes and we're going to shoot things and we're going to find out what happens. And then while also pushing the good inward freedom stuff about, we're also going to have a gay couple, we're going to have a black captain or someone who's not a captain, and then she's about to become a captain at some point. Like, I don't know, maybe I said a lot and that doesn't answer your question, or maybe it just does.
If I was to sum up, I'm guessing I'm hearing basically that Star Trek has always been a product of the society that it came out of, it, and will always have that. Yes. And it in and of itself is a self-correcting franchise, given its message of wanting to be diverse and wanting to be open. It hasn't gotten it 100% correct, but I would say Western society in general is having problems with getting it correct. Is that a fair sort of way of looking at it?
I agree. Like, it's ever evolving, and it's ever evolving to better itself and the franchise. Like, we look at today's society, we're de-evolving, in our society at the moment, with all the race relations and everything, really. But as a franchise, it's always evolving, like, and you can see it especially with the latest series, like how much better, like, it encompasses everybody.
Yeah, I mean, getting a sort of matter of fact LGBT couple, I think, was really great. There was never any like, oh, you two are gay. It's just like, oh, have you met these guys? They're great. They're a couple. Let's talk and learn about them and stuff. I was kind of miffed with what happened with Culber there, but I'm glad that they righted that ship as well. Shashank and I actually were fortunate enough to meet both gentlemen at
nice.
Star Trek Las Vegas 2 years ago. It would have been, and they are a delight. I mean, a delight in the sense of, like, I spoke to them for like maybe 15 seconds, but it was,
yeah,
it was a good fraction of a minute. But so we're on this kind of talk of Star Trek hasn't quite gotten it right yet. Star Trek is still kind of moving things forward, though. And I want to maybe talk a little bit about technology. And I kind of want to, I'm going to sort of bury the lead a little bit here, but I'm of the opinion that technological advancement doesn't mean social advancement. And what you'd said, Bryson, the idea that we're kind of in a state of de-evolution. And I would say it's because the economic system that we hold to, known as capitalism, is in decay. And when it goes into decay, it becomes fascism. And we're kind of seeing that happen in real time, and I'm kind of freaked out by it. But outside of that, is there anything, and again, I might be putting you on the spot, but you've showcased some of the artwork you have done that is Migma. What are some kind of technological things about Migma culture and society that you find cool and interesting that you think is kind of neat? It could be knowledge, it could be a way of knowing, or it could be some kind of neat thing.
Hey, also, while you're answering that, just because we are here, and I'm sure there are people who would be interested. I know I am. If you could also tell us if there are places where we could read stories about the Migma, like are there movies that explore it? Are there songs or things on YouTube that we can find and learn more about the culture from?
Yeah, especially with me, I am learning my language because I've never spoken it. It was just something that we never grow up with. So a great resource I use is all the apps, on my phone that have our language. And we have several different dialects. So it's nice to see that there are apps or websites that have the different dialects that you can see and hear, but there's a lot of great Maoyomis. Maoyomis are powwows, basically, that are on YouTube. A lot of great songs. One of my cousins, she did Blackbird. The song. Mm-hmm. She translated that into Migma and sang it, and got to sing with Sir Paul McCartney.
Wow.
Yeah. So
can we add the link in the description on that one? Would you be able to?
Yeah.
Say? Beauty. We'll make sure that ends up in the description, because that's got to be seen. That's really cool.
Yeah. So I guess there's a lot of resources out there, but I don't know. Just I'm so used to them, so I can't get them off the top of my head.
I'll be honest, following you on Twitter has been extremely helpful. There's a couple of folks who have been kind enough to allow me to sort of tag along in their conversations. Sometimes I'll even step in if there's a fight to kind of come from the settler perspective to tell them to back up and stuff like that. But I think the biggest thing is, it's an organic sort of thing where I can't really say when I learned what, but it's sort of kind of happened, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So I'm saying is follow Native Twitter, everyone. Get on and have a look and meet people and talk to them and listen. I
mean, don't just say follow Native Twitter. Just give them somewhere they can go.
Follow Bryson.
What is your Twitter, my friend?
It's Arnell Labrador.
There we go, guys.
My mother's maiden name.
Nice. We'll repeat that at the end of the episode as well, for sure.
Yeah.
So my other question was, what are some things about Migma technology? And I'm going to call it technology because in my again kind of learning through elders and through fortunately I was able to do some research at a place called Fort Edmonton Park. I got to be the Mountie there, and I got to learn how much the Mounties sucked historically, but I also learned a lot about Cree society, and there's a lot of really neat and novel and frankly just sort of awe-inspiring things about Cree society and their technology, and I would use it that way. So for instance, just for an example, they would burn wild grasslands on the prairies in huge areas, and that would control the movement of the bison. And these are these are herds of millions and millions of individuals, and they were able to, through care and through monitoring and observing their territory, not only manage the direction of these entire herds, they were able to help sustain them and keep them going. We can't do that right now. We just physically can't. And so I would consider that technology. So just to give you sort of an idea there, is there anything that off the top of your head in Migma history or culture that you're aware of that you're kind of like, that's neat. I really like that.
I guess the biggest one for me would be, our technology around the ocean, because Nova Scotia is 3/4 of it is surrounded by water, so we are a seafaring tribe. So, we have canoes that were built, that were huge ocean going canoes, so they were built specifically for ocean voyaging, like it would be nothing to go from Nova Scotia to Newfoundland in them, and they were built specifically for, taking waves over the sides, so like the sides would be built up more, kind of like a hump in the middle.
Really?
So like, yeah, and we did a lot of navigation, like there's a lot of petroglyphs that are constellations, and, a lot of our stories too are about traveling, about going from place to place. So I guess our traveling, our technology would be the best idea. Cool. Yeah.
I think a good source of reference if people want to understand the South Asian perspective on technology in Star Trek is, I don't mean to beat the same drum, but the Bejor storyline is pretty, it's not accurate, but it goes in the trajectory that you would think is similar to what would happen if the Indian culture had a lot to say in the way technology was going. Like India has a space research agency, it's called ISRO. Our ancient texts have this thing called the Pushpak Viman, which is really the world's first recorded incidents of flight. Like they drew out blueprints of what a flight would look like. So all that technology stuff is in there. The idea is how the technology is being used would be much more of the concern of people, especially that from where we come from and where Bryson comes from, like to different extents, but people that have been colonized, they know what it's like when technology is used against you as a people. Like we know the horrible things that happened to them. A lot of people know about the terrible things that happened when we were fighting to get our freedom. And it kind of goes back to the point you were making earlier, in which, technological advancement doesn't necessarily mean social advancement. If you were to actually draw a trajectory, you'd find that the relationship is inverse, that as technology advances, society in a way continues to de-advance because it stops being an equal level playing field, and then it becomes over and over, it becomes this situation of highs and lows, and the middle class disappears, and then it's people who have no money and then people who have all the money. Like if you think about the richest people today, the examples that come to your mind are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. And what are the three known for? It's technology. They've done different things in technology. So if you were to look at the South Asian culture perspective, it would be hesitation along those lines. Is before we get into technology, how exactly is it being phased out? And then, of course, we would use the examples from Hindu culture about the gods and the way our stories were told. But I think it would be as a culture, because we were also colonized, my bad.
And you look at it too, like, not just specifically for Migma, but for like Indigenous people in general, we had a lot of technology that settlers did not have. However, like we use that technology to be stewards of the land, not to be the ruler of the land, So we were all about sustainability.
Yeah, and that sort of sustainable approach, and Shashank, you talking about how the technology is used, I think is important, because immediately when you said how the technology is used, I thought of Oppenheimer when the bomb went off. He quoted Shiva from the Bhagavad Gita, and I probably pronounced that improperly, but he said, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." And fitting that he used an Indian proverb for that. And then I think in terms of sustainability, I often wonder what a solar system, let's say if instead of Star Trek we had the Expanse, but it was indigenous societies in the Expanse doing their thing, they would create systematic, like they did on Turtle Island, North America. They created these vast trade networks, and yes, of course they had conflict. Of course there were disruptions and problems and stuff, but they were able to maintain in a way, as I understand historically, to never put themselves in a position of going completely extinct. And I think that's an important thing is if you're not, it's not about getting what you want, it's about wanting what you've got, right? To quote Sheryl Crow from I'm going to soak up the sun. But I think it's that sort of idea where, using the technology is one thing, and then are you doing and using it in a sustainable way? I mean, I think about the warp speed limit that they talk about in TNG, and then immediately forget about it because it really ties your hands up. And I mean, our overuse of fossil fuels has put us in a position that when we have to stop, and it's going to have to stop soon, it's going to be pretty inconvenient for a lot of people. And we can't just write it out of our franchise story as a society. We've got to do something about it. Anyway, I'm going to...
Minor correction. Those were all great points. Just say no. It was Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita who said that. Shiva was not in the Bhagavad Gita.
No, you're
Krishna
right.
Krishna was the author of the Bhagavad Gita. But that was it. That was the really minor... I was like, if I don't pick it up and correct it, my fellow brown people will hate me.
No, thank you for doing that. So it was Krishna. But Shiva's an avatar of Vishnu, right?
Well, so there is in our religion, there's also the Holy Trinity. We call them the Tridev. So you have Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. Vishnu is the creator. Brahma is the writer or the author or the manifester. So he's the one who decides what happens between creation and destruction. And then you have Shiva, who's the destroyer. But Krishna, you're right, is the avatar of Vishnu. And there are different philosophies, but one way to look at it is people think everyone is Vishnu. So everyone is in Vishnu, which is why when Krishna says, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, he's also kind of quoting Shiva, who is supposed to be a part of him. So that's it gets complex. Like we had the Vaishnavas, who are the people who believe that everything is in Vishnu. So essentially somebody who says Tridev, the Trinity is actually all Vishnu. And then there are the Shaivas who believe they're all Shiva. So there is like the Hindu culture, there is like a 300-year period in between, I want to say like 2nd and 5th century BC, when people across the land were fighting over whether it was Shiva or Vishnu. So it was like our version of crusades that happened within our land. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, that goes away from the original.
That's cool. So, we're saying that being socially advanced is maybe the next big step for all of us, and kind of looking at Star Trek as it's coming forward. What keeps you with Star Trek? What keeps you coming back? Because we've talked Star Trek before. What keeps you there?
Basically, what keeps me there is always in reinventing itself. I guess it's a microcosm of what society is today, and how we can always better ourselves, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Just the idea that, as a mirror, Star Trek is a mirror to our current society. Star Trek is always trying to make itself better, make itself stronger, make itself more inclusive to the people who it hasn't included over a long period of time. What would you want to see if say Indigenous people were to be represented again in Star Trek? What would be, let's say Alex Kurtzman calls you up and is like, Bryson, I'm bringing you to Hollywood. You got to help me out. What sort of things would you, and I mean, you can't speak for all Indigenous people whatsoever. So this is very much a personal, objective question, not subjective.
Wait, are you saying that all my opinions in PoliTreks and other podcasts I've shared are not the same opinions of the 1.2 billion people in India?
There you go. I'm saying it. Hot take. So Bryson, what would you think you'd want to see?
Well, the elimination of monoculture. Be like, hey, we want to feature a Migma character. Let's get a Migma expert on there, like be on the show, be in the writing, do all aspects of that, to actually specifically tie down that character as a specific tribe or, a specific person, instead of just having that monoculture bring this aspect of that tribe, bring that aspect of that tribe, and mash it all into that one person.
What do you think of this episode idea for Star Trek Strange New Worlds? The Strange New Worlds Enterprise crew ends up at the Guardian of Forever, and they get a chance to go back in time. And they're at the moment, which essentially is the beginning of the genocide of the Native American people. And then they have to decide whether they'll stay there and stop the genocide, or whether they'll allow time to go forward so they can eventually get to them having to reunite with their crew.
Well, it would be
like that would be a good episode, right? Like
it would be like, but do you think
copyright Shashanks Experience and Bryson 2020 just so PoliTreks, Trek Geeks, all of the legal stuff.
But do you think like Starfleet would exist?
No.
No, it wouldn't. Like you look at that episode in DS9 with the Bell Riots, right? Starfleet did not exist for a brief moment in that episode. So like if they went back in time and stopped colonialism in North America, I think Starfleet would not exist at all.
And then maybe to kind of looking at it from my perspective, sometimes I wonder if, say I was a Starfleet captain and I got to go back in time and basically stop colonialism altogether. I mean, how couldn't I? I mean, it would be something I would be compelled to do, but at the same time, where we are right now and knowing that that's such an impossibility, writing out that future to sort of create a well, it didn't happen anyway, so therefore we're absolved kind of thing might take away the idea that I think the other thing that Star Trek and people of a settler background need to think about is what sorts of pressure should they be putting on their society to push for better representation, better understanding, and better connections with Indigenous people. And I think that ultimately is something that is truly in the very genetics of Starfleet itself. It has to be that way, because if it isn't, then I don't want any part of it, I think is kind of how I would say that. So maybe to kind of round off the conversation and to sort of look ahead and everything like that, we've got a lot of different Star Trek TV shows that are going to be coming out, a lot of new things in the franchise. We've talked about what maybe we'd want to see kind of moving forward and all that sort of stuff. So Bryson, we talked a bit about, obviously Stamets and Culber being LGBTQ representatives. And to some degree, I kind of think to myself, like, it's good that they're just a gay couple, and that's great. And that's so wonderful. And we can just say, oh yeah, they're just a gay couple. It's all good. I often wonder if what is a trans captain going to look like? If they were someone who is transsexual, who doesn't actually want to say, go through the transition, gender reaffirmation. They're happy with their physical situation. They don't experience that kind of dysphoria, so they don't need to go through it. They can just be themselves. I wonder, would you think that something like that, society would be ready for an envelope pushing technological advancement of a person like that specifically? And I mean, I don't know, I'm not trans, no one else here is specifically trans themselves as identified, but using that maybe as kind of like a launching pad to use more science fiction connections. How far do you think we should push the envelope moving forward? Should we just go full bore and just see what happens? Or do we still need to exercise this weird form of caution?
Well, that is a good question. I guess it boils down to like the fan base, like what they are comfortable with, like you look at a lot on a lot of the forums or like even in group chats, like, I play Star Trek online, and you look at some of the chat feeds, and there's like just horrible things being said, and you're like, why are you part of this why do you like this franchise if you're homophobic, if you're racist? I guess, they could push the envelopes as much as they want, and I'm all for that. It's just like, how much do you want the fan base to I guess push back?
Do you think the Star Trek fan base could be ready to mount the hills of defense against the onslaught from the reactionary quote unquote Trek fans who might have a problem with sort of, I guess, like, I don't want to just shoehorn in stuff, right? Like, that's not doing us any favors, right? Like, and sometimes I worry that it's almost like they're ticking off boxes, and I don't want that to happen. I want the characters to be compelling. But yeah, do you see this as a necessary a necessary place to go? And as Star Trek fans, do you think we've got what it takes to defend and push for that sort of thing? I guess, like, there's something inherently activist I find within the Star Trek community, and it's sort of laying dormant.
Yeah, it's like, it's where you don't, like, they want to normalize it, but don't have, I guess, the resources to do it, if you know what I mean. Like
the cultural resources.
Yeah. Like, you look at First Contact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hawk was supposed to be an out character, but they never showed it on screen.
What?
Yeah.
And they killed him.
You know that? Yeah, and they killed him. Like, he was supposed to have a partner and stuff like that. And then you look at Stamets now, like, you see that, and it's normalized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I guess there's so much backlash with that because of how polarized our society is right now. 10 years from now, it's going to be nothing, to see gay characters on there, to see trans characters on there, to see Black Native captains, So I think they got to push the envelope all the time to, I guess, normalize it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I don't know if Star Trek doesn't push the envelope, I don't know who's left to push it. There is no, for all its faults and all its flaws and all the things that we talked about, there is no franchise in this planet that exists that forcefully compels people to think about inclusivity and things like pushing the envelope, like Star Trek. Before Star Trek was there, nobody was doing a let that be your last battlefield. Nobody was doing Far Beyond the Stars. Like, there was nobody sitting down writing stories on that scale.
Siege of AR-151, is that what it is?
And there weren't people doing it. So I don't know if Star Trek doesn't do the all-out trans captain, Native American woman. Like, if they don't show the people, I don't know which franchise will. And I think inherently, I am enjoying all the let's shoot things at people and let's blow stuff up. That is fun. But I do think, like, we need a show that does push the envelope. And whether Star Trek wants to appreciate it or not, in favor of numbers, in favor of worrying about who is going to offend, if Star Trek doesn't push the envelope, who will? There is no show that will.
Yeah, and you have to have the good and bad when you push the envelope. You know what I mean? Like just look at, I don't know if you guys saw the backlash with, at the end of Picard where Seven is briefly holding hands with Raffi.
Yeah.
Like, I got in a couple arguments on YouTube about that. Like, they're like, oh, she's an established character. She's straight. It was never said in canon what sexuality 7 of 9 is, and we're just projecting our heteronormality on her. People
straight isn't a default.
Yeah, and especially in the 24th century or 25th, I guess now.
Yeah.
I might have been one of those people, but I'll leave that argument aside for another day. But
like I said, but I would say it has to do with how we storytell it, right? So they've just put in a little, oh, look at that, right? There's a little twinkle in the eye of the story now that says that this is something that they're going to explore in the next season. If they don't, then I'll be frustrated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my problem is that it seems to be, I can forgive it once, but they did it in Star Trek Beyond with Sulu at the end, where it's like, oh, look, they're clearly embracing each other. There we go. That's a couple. You see it, right? Like, do you see it? Do you see that we did that thing where they're like, you know it, right? Like everybody who's watching it, you know they're gay, right? I wanted to watch it. Like, that's what it felt like to me. And then they did the same thing at the end of this season with Picard, where it's like, oh, see, we're doing a thing. We didn't have representation, so we're doing a little thing. Can you see it? But do you watch it? We're putting the camera on it. Come on, watch it. Quick. There we go. It's gone now. Like that. That's the problem, is that's not pushing the envelope. That's saying, am I going to push the end? Am I pushing it? No, never mind. Like that was one of my, anyway, but that's not the argument here.
Yeah, and see, my argument with that was like, hey, like, haven't you ever like just patted a same-sex person's hand, like at the end of a day? You know, like that's how I think. You know, as a gay person, like to see something like that, I'm just like, it's just saying, hey, good job, like to your friend. Yeah. So like, unless it's shown on screen, like, you know, hey, I have feelings for you, you have feelings for me, blah, blah, blah. It's just contact.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
But I would also say that, you know, if someone coughs in a movie, you know, they're going to die, right? There's always that like, oh, we'll make it all the way to the end. They're like, sure we will. Sure we will. And you're like, oh, they're doomed. And so I think, you know, them putting that out there, as Shashanka said, maybe it is kind of like floating a balloon out there to see if people attack it or not.
Yeah.
But I would also agree with Shashank's point, where he's basically saying, what I understand it is that like this hasn't
brownie points for brownie points.
Yeah, this hasn't been woven into the story. Like, I want to see a romance develop. I want to see if this is where you're taking this, then give us the whole thing and normalize it and make it real. And for anyone who says, you know, like, oh, Seven's an established character and, you know, it was overturned that she was straight before. Again, gender isn't like, it's not cement.
It's like, not black and white. Yeah.
No, you can move. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like here's what it feels like to me. I don't feel like it's pushing the envelope when they do those things. It's the man wearing a suit putting his hand into the breast pocket and pulling the envelope out there. Am I going to take it? Am I going to push it? Do you see it? Am I going to push it? No, never mind. I want the numbers. Like, this might be a radical thing to say, but you know, we've not seen like a transsexual, like a nude scene, right? Like a nude sex scene that is in the pop culture. We have not seen it yet. Like, and I don't know if a show like Star Trek doesn't do it. I don't know who will, because in 1966, somebody would have said, hey, you know what I've never seen is like a white person kiss a black person on screen.
Exactly.
And Star Trek did it. Like, if Star Trek doesn't do it, that's my argument, is that if they don't do it, if they don't push the envelope, there is nobody else that is going to push the envelope.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, even think about like a command structure that would be something outside of the Western militaristic paradigm, right? Where, say, there's a different captain for different scenarios, right? Like I think about, I grew up near, not too close to, but near the Poundmaker Reserve on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border. Poundmaker, I think, is a hero of history, and I think did an amazing amount of things. He gave his life for his people, but we have to remember he was a peace chief, not a war chief. Fine Day was his war chief. Fine Day was the guy who beat the Mounties at the Battle of Cut Knife Hill in 1885. And if no one knows what I'm talking about, don't worry. There's a really good Wikipedia page on it. You can check it out. But just long and short of it is, you know, maybe command structure would look different. And I wonder if that could be explored through Star Trek. And if it is a little bit jarring, and if it does take us out of our, you know, suspension of disbelief to some degree to kind of look at this thing, Shashank, you make a good point. When William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols kissed on camera, it pushed the envelope. It really, really did. And yeah, I think that's kind of the direction Trek should take. And I think as fans, I'm planning to be vocal about it.
Mm-hmm. I think too, with like it moving from mainstream TV to like CBS All Access, they do have, I guess, more flexibility to push the envelope and to show stuff that are quote unquote controversial. So I think it's going to be exciting to see what they're going to be doing.
Yeah. I'm hopeful, and I'm excited that they're going to explore and see kind of new places. So one thing that I've always found with Star Trek is kind of looking into why they name ships the names they do, and we would be remiss not to talk about say the Crazy Horse, for instance, the I believe that was a Excelsior class. What comes to mind when you see those names represented on ships?
It's good and bad, like you just kind of go back to appropriation, and that's a whole different conversation to have. You see that especially in car designs too, like like the Jeep Cherokee, and stuff like that. So it's like, hey, let's honor you by naming a ship name class after you.
Yeah.
like you got the Cheyenne class of ships. I know there's the Tecumseh is another ship, and Tecumseh, if I remember correctly, was a war chief on the lakes.
Yes,
I believe. Yes. Yeah. So like it's kind of cool to see that, but it's like, as you were saying, like like what were they thinking in the writing room when they're like, oh, let's use this name. Was it an actual, just a real thought, or was it just like, hey, let's just make it this name because it sounds cool?
Yeah, and again, maybe it is that kind of what Shashank was talking about with regard to taking a picture. Look at the picture, look at the picture, look at what we've got here, and maybe it's that kind of passive appropriation that we can fight a lot of battles, and there's hills that we want to and not want to die on as progressive people who watch Star Trek. But I do think that it's at least worth a second glance, because when they do pick these names, these colonial these names of people who were the victims of colonialism, and now their names are plastered on ships that are arguably colonial, or at least made by a series or a franchise that is still holding on to a lot of its colonial vestiges. I do. I wonder what exactly they're trying to get at. What do you think? What do you guys think they're trying to say here in sort of a passive way?
Well, like looking at the Crazy Horse, like fictionalizing it, I guess I would be very interested to be on that ship and looking at what their logo looks like. On the ship, is it a quintessential headdress, red guy in a headdress? Or like, are they doing the tomahawk chop? Like I'm like, you see that in today's society, that we're doing this because we're honoring you, honoring the Native Americans that don't exist anymore, and you're like, hi, we're still here. So
it sort of relegates it to the past then, doesn't it? It sort of says, yes, this is good and done, and we can just, again, it's like a box gets ticked. Yeah,
it's like, hey, look, there, we're honored. You're honored.
I can't help but find a connection sometimes as well to that indigeneity, and maybe it comes from Journey's End, and we get a little bit of this from the Trexpertise YouTube video that was out a couple of years ago about Native people in Star Trek. The Maquis. So when we look at the Maquis and their desire to not only resist Cardassians, but also resist the Federation, I wonder if there's something of an indigenous spirit in that desire to resist, an anti-colonial spirit. I mean, I don't think you have to be indigenous to be anti-colonial or anti-imperial.
No, you don't.
But I wonder if there is sort of a bit of the indigenous people's stories, and I would argue maybe the same for India as well, those who resisted British rule as well. Do you find any sort of connective tissue there, either of you?
I do, for sure. Like, like you look at the Maquis, and it came out way before, like, the Idle No More movement and stuff like that. So like it kind of like showcases that, well, not to co-opt it, but like, to showcase that indigenous activism still takes place in that universe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool to see that there's a lot of similarities with indigenous activism, indigenous decolonialization with the Maki, the resistance.
Yeah. I'm very frustrated with what happens to them in the end with the Dominion, just literally wiping them out. And it's kind of like, well, at least we were letting you stay alive. And I feel like that maybe kind of I wouldn't mind untying that knot and having another look at it. What about you, Shashank?
I mean, for my people, of course, we shared a lot of similarities with the way we got rid of colonialism, with a lot of the world, and the way we fought back and the consequences we had. I mean, to me, the Maki are very much like space socialist revolutionaries, and their ideas are kind of honorable, but the actions they go about it, that can get gray. Like India had a whole socialist revolutionary movement. I've talked about Bhagat Singh on the show before, but Bhagat Singh is one of the most popular figures. He was known for arranging, the most notorious thing he did is he arranged a secret mission to go bomb the parliament at the time the British were here in India. And that was what he was hung for. But that eventually created a movement that added to what Gandhi was doing, and then it led to us getting our freedom. So I do see with the stories that they tell about the Maki, to an extent, what happens with Bajor, the way Bajorans fight the Cardassians during the occupation, as they call it, like those stories also resonate with me, because it's clearly very much a story about people who live on a land that has been overtaken by people who come from outside, and they have superior technology. So they think they know better. It's very similar to the story that happens with India.
There's a lot to think about here. And I've got to go to dinner pretty quick here, so I'm upset that I'm going to have to go, folks. But yeah, I guess
we could always do another episode.
We might have to, and maybe kind of bounce off of this a little bit, because I just don't think that we can fully. And I think maybe at the start of this episode, Shashank and I bombarded you, Bryson, with questions, because I think that's another interesting point, and it's maybe my experience is I always kind of come off like a goof or a doorknob when I'm asking people who I hold in high regard about their own culture and society, because I know a lot of where I can seem too excited or too, oh, wow. And kind of like, the best way to put it is I really do feel the separation. As a white Canadian settler, I can feel that separation every single day of my life between myself and the Indigenous people who I grow up around and interact with. It's a social separation. It's a social barrier. And when I feel like those barriers are down, I'm rattling with energy and excitement, because I want to ask every question at once, and it becomes really difficult not to. So I don't think this conversation actually should end. We should maybe put this out there, see if folks on Twitter want to ask and talk more questions, see sort of what the Trek Geeks group want to talk about it, and kind of move on from there, because we can't leave this here. We have to keep talking about more things, because I think more needs to be said. What about you, Shashank?
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Cool. Well, in the meantime, Bryson, we did mention this earlier, but you're also known for the Migma word of the day, and I enjoy it quite a bit. It's on Twitter. Once again, how can people find you, and what can they expect if they get to meet you on the social medias?
Well, expect a lot of curveballs, I guess. Like I sometimes my Twitter is a hot mess. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm always tweeting about, actually, I kind of like really treat it as a diary, So I'm always moving on to something, but like the main things that I really tweet about is about Migma culture, about reconnecting with my culture, because I never grew up in it. I wasn't allowed to learn it when I was a child. So it's all about reconnecting, and especially for being, like, for me, like, I'm gay, but my tribe has no ceremony around that, because it was taken out of us through colonization, so it's about reconnecting with me being a Mig-maw two-spirit person in my culture, trying to find out what I am, so it's a big journey. My Twitter is a big journey of that, of trying to reconnect, I guess. So, and a lot of Star Trek too.
It's a story of exploration, though, and I think as Star Trek fans, we have to love exploration, and like I said, it's been really enjoyable getting to sort of explore Migma society and culture through you. It's some of the best education a person can get.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Yeah, we look forward to doing this in the future. Cannot wait.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys for having me on. I enjoyed this a lot.
And the Trek Geeks Network is proud to have Fansets as one of its sponsors. You can check out Fanset's amazing line of pins and collectibles over at their website at www.fansets.com. You can check out some new pins that have just come out. We have Philippa Georgiou from Discovery. We have Michael Burnham, Season 3, and Fenris Ranger, calling card logo, which is pretty darn cool to check out. So do check out Fansets for more, and we're very happy to have them as our sponsors. Fansets, our pins have character. So if one con wasn't enough, we actually are proud to present a second con that's going to be coming up through our friends at Science Division, who are sponsors of ours. They make that tribble that I enjoy quite a bit. It's quite a cute thing. So basically, the long and short of it is, con itself is all about community. Kayla and Jay are organizing a great one. Plus, they're going to be wrapping up the day. Wrapping up the day will be a fantastic panel with our very own Ali Martinez, the 24-year-old Trekkie, navigating the destructive negativity and gatekeeping. So I can't think of a better person to talk about that than Ali. So very exciting sort of stuff. It's all happening on June the 14th. That's this Sunday, 2:30 Eastern time in the year 2020, in case you're listening to this in the deep future. You can get more information on the Science Division website at sciencediv.com. Just click on the link for the Connected Con at the top of the page. When you visit the top of the page on the day of the con, you'll find a link to each participant's virtual table. They're also with their bio. Clicking the link will take you onto a Skype or Zoom meeting to talk to the participant as though you just walked up to their table. They're still adding tables, and anyone who is interested in hosting one can get more information on the Science Division website at sciencediv.com. So yes, looks like a very entertaining thing. Trouble's never been this fun with Science Division, and we thank them for including us into the Connected Con and sponsoring this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode of PoliTreks, and definitely we're going to be having Bryson back on to talk more about Indigenous representation. Also want to learn about the BIPOC or BIPOC representation that can start becoming a little bit more of a thing now that we are, as a society, talking about it. So with that, we hope that you enjoy the episodes to come, live long and prosper, and onward to Star Science. PoliTreks is a production of Coconut Media Works. Executive producers Bill Smith and Dan Davidson. For even more Star Trek discussion, check out the other members of the Trek Geeks Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and TrekGeeks.com.